Right, Babs, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be building the Rosemary and Thyme, which is a build I've been wanting to do for a long time now. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe, to like and hit that notification bell. Now, I have been wanting to do this build for a while. I did initially do this build on Twitch, which is a while back now, but I've never finished it. I've never completed the build, and I thought, why not go back and revisit this build? And rather than do it on live stream, I thought I'd record this instead. So I started with a little bit of landscaping. Now I am not very good with the landscaping tool on The Sims. In fact, I don't think I ever really use it. But given that this build is kind of raised a bit and then you've got the street around the front, I knew I had no choice really but to just start mapping out the land and the grounds and just raising it up a bit and lowering it in places. You can see just on the left there's like a little sewer which is next to the Rosemary and Thyme tavern, which you see in the game. I have brought the building right back at the lot. There is a little space at the back in The Witcher where you can go out the back, but I decided to bring this building all the way to the back and just mostly focus on the building itself and just a little bit at the front where the street would be. I had struggled really just getting the landscaping right. It's a bit more round rather than square, which you can see. I do try and rectify this later on. Now I start building the shell, I suppose, of the build. It's really just a rectangular shell to start with, but then you do have this rather interesting feature which is iconic in the Rosemary Thyme, which is that little diagonal section of the build, which you can see I had to do it in stages because I just didn't seem to want to be built, and then I just had to widen it just a little bit, which kind of messed up the shell, but it did work out in the end. I did tidy it up a little bit. I honestly absolutely enjoy doing this build. This is actually my favourite kind of style in terms of architecture. I'm all about medieval buildings, and particularly medieval buildings in places like Bruges and Ghent. Those kind of architectures I absolutely enjoyed. So I really have had a lot of fun doing this. It isn't without its challenges. I did struggle namely with stairs and with platforms, which we will see later. I spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out the platform in the corner of the main building downstairs. Took a while to kind of figure that out. So as you can see, I've been trying to figure out how to do the staircases in Rosemary and Thyme. Now, it's just a bit awkward to do in The Sims. It doesn't translate quite as well as it does in the Witcher game, so it was trying to kind of adapt to how the stairs would be laid out. I did start doing double stairs for the second floor, going into the second floor, but the space just didn't allow for it. Now I was going by memory as well. I later went back onto the Witcher game and found that actually it wasn't a diagonal wall going into Dandelion's main bedroom, but rather it was a square room. But I decided to settle on the diagonal section instead, and it worked out alright in the end. Now, given that I'm mostly going by memory, a lot of this is really my interpretation of like the interior of the Rosemary and Thyme, but for the most part I do try and keep it as accurate as I can. Trying to translate architecture from other games into The Sims is a bit tricky. Obviously with The Sims you kind of have to obey their kind of like game physics, I guess, and just trying to figure it out. Now doing the balcony section, I had a little play around with the I can't remember what you call them, but with the little walls, with the freezers, I suppose you could say. I wasn't too sure what type I wanted. I did like the first section, the first type that I used, the railings at the top. but it wasn't quite as accurate as I'd liked it to be, as close to the original Rosemary and Thyme. So in the end I did change them, but I did enjoy the aesthetic of those, but it just didn't work out in the end and it wasn't quite as accurate. So it took a lot of time trying to figure out the railings as well, trying to keep it all in theme and as close to the original Rosemary and Thyme as I could. So in the end I went with the less flashier frieze, I suppose you could say. But it did work out in the end. Later on I did have a bit of difficulty because in the Witcher 3, when you look at the Rosemary and Thyme, you had curtains on the outside just hanging off on the kind of like the frieze, which was really difficult to do in The Sims. So I had a lot of fun trying to figure that out. Maybe cried a couple of times. Now I am limited obviously with the furniture, the doors, the wallpapers, so although I could try and get it as close to the aesthetic of the Rosemary and Thyme as I could, obviously we don't really have a lot of medieval or kind of like Bruges or Ghent style buildings and materials and stuff like that in The Sims. So thankfully we had the cottage living pack, which I use mostly for the walls on the outside and the inside. I may have gone a bit overboard with some of the wallpapers for the outside section of the build, but I really wanted to convey the style as much as I could. So in the end I went with like a darker wood for the support beams, I guess you could say, on the walls outside. And I just repeated this process all the way through, kind of mixing up all the different types of the same wallpaper, so it just has a bit of variety in terms of the support beams. One thing I wished I did in this build, I didn't do it at the time, but looking back, if I had to do this build a bit differently, I would have kept the extension more on the second level or the first floor of the build, because if you look in medieval buildings in Tudor period, you'll find that there's a little bit of an overhang on the second floor and the third floor sometimes. I wished I kind of kept that all around on the back, just so you still had that kind of 3D, I guess, effect of the build. But it worked pretty well at the front. I just kind of wish I kept it all the way around instead of just on the one side. And again, just going through the different wallpapers of the same kind of type, just to get a variety of the support beams to look like it's supporting the whole building. Not too sure if I got a little bit overboard, but again, I just wanted to get the aesthetic and the style across. And then we're just going on to the roof of the Rosemary and Thyme, which is again is the iconic aspect. you recognise immediately the Rosemary and Thyme in The Witcher 3 when you first go into Novigrad. It's one of the first buildings you look for, and you know immediately where you are and where it is. I absolutely enjoy just kind of like playing around with the roofs just a little bit. It's relatively simple, and I just absolutely enjoy just seeing how it shapes the build all together. And moving on to the windows, and one of the more frustrating aspects for me about this is the limited choices for windows and doors in this particular style. There are, in the sense, I would love to have more choices in terms of vintage or medieval style windows, rather than the typical vampire goth style that you get in the vampire pack, for example. That's really stylized by like the late Victorian period. It's not all vampires and goths in medieval times, but I had to do what I could. Thankfully, I had enough types for from the cottage living just to make do, but it would have been nice to have more choices, perhaps bigger windows in that style. And I didn't really want to use the same type of windows either, so I've pretty much been cycling through the packs and just ended up with two types of windows. I've just got the single one there and double, just to kind of fit in with the theme. And again, the second part of my frustration as well is the lack of roof colour choices. Now, the roof on the Rosemary and Thyme in The Witcher 3 is red, but for some reason it just didn't feel quite as authentic in the Sims for trying to translate that. It just feels a bit pale in colour rather than the rich tones that you see in The Witcher. But again, it is a different game, so. And then just playing around with the bordering on the roof. So inside, I started planning out the rooms, starting with the bottom floor, which is the main section, and just playing around with the windows, just making sure they're not too high but not too low either. So one section of the main floor of the Rosemary and Thyme that absolutely stressed me out was the raised platform. I had spent 2 hours trying to figure out how to put this platform in the room, just like raise a little area where Dandelion can sing and dance to his heart's content without destroying the pre-existing walls that are placed. And it took a long time to figure out. I literally just threw my hands up in the air and despaired at several points doing this. In the end, I did figure out a way to do it, but it involved redrawing the walls around the platform. But it took a long time trying to tweak and edit and just fitting it all in. And platforms, honestly, are the bane of my life. It did take a while to get it to work, but in the end we got there. It was just trying to figure out how to raise it without raising the whole building, and then putting it in without destroying the walls. It took a long time just to figure it all out. And I explored the idea of maybe just having a little gap between the stage, I guess, and the walls, and maybe just filling it in just to make it look like it goes all the way back there, but that didn't quite work out. I played with like half walls, I played with just raising the floor a little bit, but nothing seemed to work, and in the end I had to literally plunge into the whole platform thing and figure that out. I did watch YouTube videos just how to put a platform in a room without destroying the existing walls, but spoiler alert, I had to destroy the walls and then put them back in to get them to work in the end. but it did take a long time, and you do see me pause for a minute just to watch the video, just to figure it all out. And as you can see, I started redrawing the walls and just placing it all back in. One of the biggest frustrations is trying to raise a platform in the room without raising the whole building. It took a long time just to figure it all out. And it's the same thing with the stairs as well. It was one of the more trickier parts of this build, to be quite honest with you. And then of course I lost the general width of the diagonal because it had to be in line with the diagonal room on the second floor. It ended up being 3 walls across instead of 2. In the end I just went with the 3 on the bottom. I just figured it didn't matter that much, just as long as the idea was there. But it was just a lot of tidying around and playing around, just figuring it all out. You can see I'm just literally pulling my hair out at this point, trying to get this to work. And is a moment where I kind of took myself away from the build and just watched a YouTube video on how to do the platforms, and realised really there's nothing for it. I had to destroy the walls and then redraw them once I got the platform in place. And one of the trickier parts about this as well is the fact that it has to be on an angle because it's going into the corner of the build. It did recommend I draw a second wall around, but again, it was just playing around really with the walls and with the flooring just to try and get it to work. And I've lost count how many times I redrew that corner. And at this point I started playing around with platforms and overlapping them, seeing if I could get this to work. And I figured I would have to redraw the walls once I've placed the platforms in. And in the end it didn't really matter to me now whether the that diagonal wall was in line with the diagonal wall on the second floor. I just wanted to get this platform in as soon as possible so I could move on to the next part of the build. What I found interesting as well was when I was putting new platforms next to each other, they overlapped the top one, so I had to lower the newly placed one to the level of the original platform that I put in. So it was really just playing around with the platforms and putting them in together, and in the end I got it all together and ended up with the stage that I wanted in the corner. It took many a blood, sweat and tear to do it. And then the agonising process of redoing the wallpapers again back to how it originally used to be before I put the platforms in. Hopefully the support beams aren't too much. And then we had the interior of the Rosemary and Thyme, the main floor, the first of the ground floor. I wanted to keep the aesthetic as close as I could, and I couldn't really remember too much of the interior of the Rosemary and Thyme, to be quite honest with you. I couldn't remember how the stage was laid out or the bar. So I was really going by memory, and I thought I'd add a little twist to it, my own interpretation, I guess, in The Sims. For, you know, if The Witcher 3 was in The Sims 4, how would it look? So I just added my own little twist to it. And again, just adding support beams inside, just to add more character into the build, into the interior. Of course, wooden floors. There's going to be a lot of drinks spilt by the patrons of the Rosemary and Thyme. I must admit, at the time, I didn't know you could have painted platform edges. So I wanted to cover up the ghastly concrete colouring of the platform edge. So I just put stairs all around just to cover it, which works. But I later found out you could paint the edgings of the platform, but it didn't really matter to me because stairs at this point also work just as well. Then we're on to the second floor of the Rosemary and Thyme, and just planning out the rooms and the hallways. And this was a bit of a head doer, to be quite honest. It just seems, in terms of proportions in The Witcher 3, it all worked well, but when doing the proportions of the rooms into The Sims, recreating the bedrooms and that, it just looked hilariously long. Like, on the one section you can see that particularly large room there. There were 2 rooms in The Witcher 3 and a very long corridor, and trying to draw those 2 longish rooms, it was just comically too long in The Sims 4. Yeah, it worked in The Witcher 3. So in the end, I kind of tweaked the room layouts a little bit, and you'll see me do this later on, just to change it up a bit. I added a bathroom, which the Rosemary and Thyme doesn't have in The Witcher, but I decided to add a bathroom into the Rosemary and Thyme in The Sims because, you know, you gotta go to the toilet somewhere. Can't do that to our Sims. And again, having to play around with the stairs, this was the second headache, really, of the whole build. And I wanted to see how small I could make that little stairwell in the build as I could, so I could get as much space for the rooms and as much length in the corridor as I could. But it took a lot of playing around. As I mentioned earlier, I went from double stairs to the single stair, just so I could see, just so I could get as much room as I could. And this is just really leading to Dandelion's room, so I figured it doesn't need to be a grand staircase, although Dandelion as a character is rather grand. And then just playing around with the rooms, and I realised at this point that these bedrooms are going to be comically long if I was to keep to the original floor plan of The Witcher 3, the Rosemary Thyme and The Witcher 3. Couldn't really do it in The Sims 4 without it looking ridiculous, to say. And I tried like moving things around, maybe making it smaller on the top floor, but it just didn't seem to work. So I decided to add an extra room to the second floor and turn it into probably a more expensive, luxurious room if someone was to pay for a room to stay the night. And of course then I also added a toilet as well, which you'll see in a moment. So again, back to the support beams. And I'm still debating whether I've done too much for them. Whether I've overdone it or if it's just right. And then I figured it looked a bit sparse on the top floor where Dandelion's room is, so I just added a few more support beams there. I think I have a little bit of an obsession with support beams in this build. Now going back to the outside, obviously there's that raised area that's kind of fenced off, and then you have the stairs going up to the build. I tweaked the landscaping just a little bit, just so we had a bit more street, so we can see like the street of Novigrad, I guess. A little hint of that. Obviously this is in Henford on Bagley, I can't remember the name. So I was limited for space again in terms of how much street I could do to replicate in Novigrad's murkier environment. And I thought the landscaping would be more of a headache, but it actually wasn't too bad at this point because I'd pretty much got the build there, so it was just really tidying it up and just shaping it a bit more, because it's square on the one side and then it just kind of rounds off on the other side, where in the Witcher game it would go towards a large portcullis gate, one of the many entrances into Novigrad. It was a bit tricky doing it on here because, again, limited for space, really. And then it was just fencing off the rest and just tidying up the landscape and just rounding it off just a little bit more, making sure it's all level on the streets, on the street level and on the Rosemary and Thyme level. And again, just flatten it out just so we have a bit more street to walk on. Just to try and keep it as realistic as I could, really. Again, another set of stairs leading up to the Rosemary and Thyme. Now at the front of the Rosemary and Thyme, they had a little stage where the performers would be performing. This was after you rescued Dandelion, of course, in the game. You would have performers singing and dancing and playing music on the front stage of what would later be known as the Chameleon. Dandelion does rename the Rosemary and Thyme to the Chameleon, but I've added that little staging area just so no one can mistake that it's Dandelion's establishment. And I played with water. I didn't want it too deep either because this was a sewer. I didn't really want it overflowing. Just really painted it a bit more murkier and a bit more gravelly around in places. Obviously to resemble kind of like a sewer in a medieval city as much as I could. And then had a bit of a dirt road, which is actually what you see in the actual Witcher game as well in Novigrad. A lot of, particularly in the slum areas of Novigrad, it'll be muddy. And then just kind of painting it as much as I could to make it resemble the exterior of the tavern. Now we don't have kind of like brick shaped stones. You'll see in images of the Rosemary and Thyme, they had like these slabs that line the raised area of the Rosemary and Thyme. So I just ended up with I decided to go with a more uneven, rockier section of the lining of the raised area of the Rosemary and Thyme, rather than the more tidier, slabbier stone, which would have been too repetitive. I kind of like the more rugged look. So again, this is just kind of tweaking it up just a little bit, just as much as I could. So it resembles as close as it could to the exterior, but then just adding my own little twist to it. Now, to my great disappointment, there wasn't any fire street lights, like a brazier. So in the end, I just ended up putting a tree out the front, just so there was something there, really. But there was no fire brazier, like street lantern that I could put there, just to resemble the medieval aspect of the location. And again, there was no way of recreating the sewer tunnel, so I decided to just line around where the sewer tunnels would be with like heather and long grass. Now, going back inside, I wanted borders within the pub, a bit like the support beams that you see when you go into when you go into like a medieval building. So it was just really just drawing walls and then replacing them with the support beams. I actually had a little bit of fun actually doing this, just mapping it all out and making it all a kind of square, I guess. There's something rather I enjoy about the uniform squareness of doing the support beams. Again, just finishing off sections of the pub. I decided to just section it all into squares for no reason other than just really that it was satisfying to do. Now again, they don't have brazier fire lighting that you see in The Witcher 3, so I ended up with kind of like candles, like candelabras, I think is the correct word that they're called, and I wanted them to look like they're hanging from the support beams in the game. Now I did change the support beams to the slightly thicker ones, because one of the frustrating things is the ceiling when you go on into like the sim view. When you look inside the building, the ceiling seems to swallow up the support beam, so I ended up going for a thicker support beam, just so you could see and just to emphasize. And I did play around with different support beams to see which ones would get swallowed up by the ceilings and which one wouldn't, and in the end I just went with the thickest one that I could find. And it did work. It worked in the end. I was a bit worried that it was overdone, but then remembering of all the Tudor buildings I've been in, the support beams you see inside are actually quite big. So it still had an element of realism there. And again, just playing with the lighting. I ended up moving the lighting, not having them hanging from the support beams, because the candelabra just got swallowed into the support beam. So it was either the support beam being swallowed up into the ceiling, or the candelabra being swallowed into the support beam. So I chose to move the candelabras and keep the thick support beams. Now I wanted to resemble the pub vibe. Obviously medieval taverns, they'd have like benches like you would see in the in like a pub garden, but I'd have it on the inside. Just wanted to give that medieval tavern vibe as much as I could. And then I was looking for a way to include a portrait of Dandelion. Now, I was told there was a cheeky little cheat that you could do with the Sims gallery, where you could get the Sims to paint a picture from real life and then pull it into gallery, and then you could have it. And I was hoping someone would have done that, because it is quite an iconic picture of Dandelion, but sadly that never happened. So I thought, rather than just go through all the effort of putting a Dandelion picture into the Sims, I just picked a random portrait and just basically pretend that was Dandelion. Like, if Dandelion was in the Sims, that's what he would look like. Which is a shame. I would have loved to have the iconic Dandelion picture, and you can see me there just trying to find that Dandelion picture, but I never found it in the end. So I just went with the typical Sims picture, just for all intents and purposes. Let's just pretend that's Dandelion. Now, in Rosemary and Thyme, Dandelion has a little plaque, so that denotes this, I guess, a laurel or something like that, an award for your services to music and that. I included that in the Sims build just to represent that. Now, Sims 4 does not have a lute, but it does have a guitar. I am aware that historical inaccuracy, shall we say, there were no violins in the timeline of The Witcher, at least in the medieval section that The Witcher is supposed to be based on. There were no violins nor guitars, there were lutes. But The Sims 4 doesn't have lutes, so I just decided to just put a guitar and violin there just to symbolise the musical aspects of the Rosemary and Thyme. And then it was just filling the build with clutter. I tried to find as much medieval and basic clutter as I could to put into the Rosemary and Thyme. And then just kind of going into debug mode and finding as much clutter as I could, just to fill it up and give the place an element of being used and being lived in. I couldn't find any goblets for some reason, so I ended up with wine glasses. So it's a very mixed timeline in this build. And again, just cluttering the place, making it look like people have been in there, having food, having drinks, having a good time, basically. Just putting like apples, tomatoes, meat, wooden plates, just to try and give that sense of lived in. If I have to be honest with you, cluttering a build is actually one of my favourite elements of building like a Sims house, or just designing a build, really. It just adds an air of, as I said, like an element of it being lived in. It just adds some authenticity to the build. It just adds another level and another layer to it. I did struggle finding more medieval based like food types and stuff, so I just thought we'll just put food in there. It doesn't really matter what, as long as the idea is there. I figured it didn't really matter. I had contemplated putting plasma fruit into this build, because there's a character in The Witcher called Regis, who's a vampire and is a very close friend of Geralt of Rivia. So I wanted to do a little nod to him by putting plasma fruit, but I've forgotten to do it until long after I've finished the build and recorded this. So I might go back and add a cheeky plasma fruit just to add a little nod to him. And again, couldn't find any goblets, so just went with glass tumblers. Just to give an element of it being a pub. Now, one thing I wished The Sims had was, like, for clutter, would be like a deck of cards or cards scattered. If there is, didn't find any when I was doing this build. If I had, it would have been great because that would have been a perfect reference to Gwent. But I couldn't find it, so sadly just settled with food and fake goblets, I suppose. And I was trying to find hay for like the flooring, but again, they didn't have that in The Sims, so I just settled with putting like little rugs and stuff and clutter and trash, obviously, to make it look like as it would medieval times. Maybe just add a bit of chaos to the ground floor of the build. And it was at this point I realised that my stairs had somehow been deleted. I'm not sure entirely how, so frustratingly I had to do the stairs all over again, and it was a bit of a pain to do because I had everything all out and then it was just trying to fit everything in. So it meant having to take out the walls, take out some of the clutter and decorations that I've already put in there. Made me weep a little bit inside, and then having to find the room to turn the stairs into that right angle, I guess. You can see me just trying to figure out how to get this all in there. And again, everything I had done, I had to redo again. I had to make the hallway a little wider. Practically start back from the beginning again with the stairs. It was really, really frustrating. And because I'd landscaped the area outside, I didn't have room to turn the stairs either. So I was really just trying to find the space to do it and then just turning them, and in the end I did. And just having to redo the stairwell all over again, as well as the little walls on the inside. And then because I had to mess around with the stairs, everything just seemed out of proportion again. I decided to extend the support beam from one wall to this stair wall. Again, just lighting it with wall candles and shelves as well. The shelves that I placed in the downstairs resembled the shelves in the actual game, so I put loads of those as I could. I couldn't seem to put a lot of clutter on them, which was a shame, but I did figure it out in the end for another shelf just to make it look as close to the shelves in The Witcher 3 as I could. And I decided in that moment to give Dandelion an ensuite because, of course, it's Dandelion. Dandelion gets his own bathroom. Again, it was trying to find the right type of decor to put inside the Rosemary and Thyme that would be consistent. Now, given this area would have been accessed by people who paid for rooms, it wouldn't have fancier decor. So I just kind of just mixed it up, maybe put something like salt and pepper shaker just to make it look like a design or something that Dandelion's probably collected or picked up, and little Tupperware and stuff like that. I wasn't entirely sure what kind of stuff to put on the shelf. So I just really went with a mix of everything, like books and a quill, some pots. And of course, given this is a medieval world, there would have been lots of crates and barrels, especially in a place like a tavern. And of course, there has to be a lot of barrels and crates for Geralt to loot. Or else, how else is he going to get free food? And then just adding little additions to the walls to make the place look a bit worn down, a bit overused. I've added kind of like plaster and cracks and stuff, and cobwebs just to give a bit more again a more used vibe for the tavern, just so it feels like it's been lived in. Now for the new room, this room that's not in the game, but I've added in anyway because it would have looked ridiculous otherwise. I added a double bed, but I didn't want it as fancy as the double bed Dandelion's going to sleep in, because of course Dandelion has to have the best of everything. And again, just furnishing the rooms, adding little decorations and bits and pieces, as you would when you like a rent a room if you were travelling in the medieval times and feeling world weary. I just wanted to just make it look as lived in as possible with all kinds of food and stuff like that. Frustratingly, the meat that I put on the plates, as you can see, when I opened the game, the gallery seems to have taken the meat. So if you are downloading this map, well, I say map, this build from the gallery, unfortunately we will not see the meat, but just so you know, just pretend that they're there, just so we get that vibe. Now again, The Sims doesn't have medieval wooden style bed, so I went with the shabbiest looking bed as I could find for the more sparsely decorated rooms, just to give that element of theme. Now for this room, which is the makeshift bathroom, which is not in the Witcher game, but I've added in anyway, for reasons. I wasn't entirely sure what to do, so I added buckets for what would be, I guess, toilets. Um, Again, the Sims didn't have any cloths, so I've added like a pile of towels to signify cloths. And I wasn't too sure what to do about the sink, so in the end, I think I just ended up not putting the sink in and just putting 2 buckets in there and a candle. And that's just basically to denote a bathroom of sorts. This isn't in the game, but given that it would have looked ridiculous if I just kept it as it was with the 2 long rooms, I just added it in there and just put the 3rd bedroom towards the back and made it a double bedroom. And then this would be the more pricier room, I guess you could say. Not as fancy or lavish as Dandelion's bedroom on the top floor, but just to add a little bit of gravitas for the more higher paying patrons. I added like 2 little sofas and a fancy double bed, just to kind of fancy the place up a bit more. But again, this room isn't in the Rosemary and Thyme. It would have been a completely different layout, but given the proportions and aspects of the Sims 4, it was really hard to do if I tried to keep it to the original. So I just decided to just add that extra double bedroom. And again, just clutter-wise, I've added slightly more clutter here, a bit more on the higher end. I added bookshelves and stuff just to denote the pricier aspect of the room that would be available to rent. Again, I was trying to find medieval style bookshelves and furniture and stuff like that, which is really hard to do. I do wish The Sims would include more medieval, not gothic medieval, but a bit like from the Tudor period, I guess you could say, into the game. And then finally to my favourite room of the entire building, which is Dandelion's bedroom or penthouse, I guess you could say. Again, it's not 100% accurate in terms of layout. It's a bit more square on the top landing, but I wanted to keep the diagonal wall in, so again added just my little twist. And then given Dandelion an ensuite, which she doesn't have in the game, but given that it's Dandelion, I felt it's only right that Dandelion has an ensuite, because Dandelion, he has to have the fanciest room of the entire tavern. Gave him the fanciest bed. Again, I don't know how historically accurate that would be for the medieval period, but because this is The Witcher and it's set in fantasy, I kind of gave it a little free pass, I guess you could say, in terms of furniture. And I know that Dandelion hangs around with Geralt, and Geralt hangs around with sorceresses, so I was like, maybe just add a little bit of influence, elvish influence, sorceress influence in terms of furniture, and that Dandelion may or may not have acquired on his travels with Geralt or on his adventures. So I just added that little aspect into Dandelion's room. And honestly, this is my favourite room of the entire build, because I felt like I could just kind of have a little bit more freedom in terms of what I could add into Dandelion's room. Now, Dandelion is a bit of a womanizer, or a bit of a lover. So I wanted to add like a bust or portraits of his conquests, I guess you could say, if that's the right word to use. You know, that of his lady loves. So I've added like portraits of like a nice lady sim, and just basically just added that just to kind of symbolise Dandelion's love, shall we say. And then just added loads of bookshelves. I wish there were more like half shells or cupboards like you see in the Witcher 3 that you could put into this build, but I ended up putting like dressers and stuff like that just to kind of symbolise those. Added a table, lots of food, bit more fancier than the food you'd find downstairs, and just basically just went all out just to make it look as lavish as possible, just for Dandelion. And then adding a portrait of, I guess, one of Dandelion's lady loves, I guess you could say. We'll pretend that's Priscilla. And I wasn't really too sure what else to add. I added like a mirror, I figured because again it's expensive back then to have a mirror and to have all these things, and Dandelion is a renowned bard who would have accumulated a lot of money, plus he would have hung around with Geralt a lot and would have acquired a lot of things as well. And again, I wasn't too sure on the curtains. I added a bit of like a theatrical red because, of course, Dandelion's in the performing arts and stuff. Now again, for the bathroom, I wasn't entirely sure what to do for the toilet and for the bath. In The Witcher 3, they had this round bathtub, wooden bathtub, but they didn't really have that in the Sims. So I just ended up with a ceramic bath and just pretended that's the fanciest bath that you could afford back in the day. Isn't historically accurate, but at this point it's Dandelion. We're giving a free pass in terms of historical accuracy, I guess you could say. And now for the bit that really did me head in. This is the third one. That was a bit of a headache. The Sims didn't really have a lot of curtains, like one-sided curtains. I ended up using the ones from Paranormal, just to kind of add to the balcony. But it was really tricky to get the curtains onto the balcony wall, I guess you could say, where I put the little freezers on. And then just keeping it all on one side and not have it turn, which was very difficult to do because it kept turning onto the opposite wall on the other side instead of keeping it to one side to put on the freezer. You'll see what I mean as I go along. I've had to draw an extra wall in the middle just to keep the curtains on the one side and not automatically turn to the opposite wall, which was really tricky to do. And again, trying to do this bit was really challenging because, again, with the camera angle constantly changing, you've got the roof and you're being raised up and down, and trying to get the curtains on the one side without having them turn onto the opposite wall was really challenging. I did lose a curtain on the side of the balcony. You will see that in a moment. I don't know where that's gone. I gave up putting curtains on the side of the build and just kept it to the front of the Rosemary and Thyme because I figured the idea is there anyway. And it was too much of a header to do. But yeah, trying to, as you can see here now, I'm just trying to put the curtains on the side and it just wasn't happening no matter how. It just vanished. it just vanished. And I did place it thinking, oh, maybe it'll appear if I go into like live view and see it from the Sims perspective, but it wasn't there. So I placed it down and I've no idea where it is. I couldn't see it on the bottom floor when I went to try and find it. I later found out that it appears in the bottom floor, but you have to be on the top floor perspective, if that makes sense. Anyway, I found out was when I was doing the recording afterwards of the interior, and I was on the top floor, but I lowered the camera down to the bottom to view the bottom floor, and then there was the curtain there, but you don't see it if you were on the bottom floor camera. So if you do find it, if you download this build, I do apologise. Yeah, I'd uploaded it onto the gallery at that point before I deleted the curtain, so it's there for posterity now. And I couldn't find a sign for the Rosemary and Thyme, so I just sent it up with a simple time. And here is the finished product. I hope you enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this build, please don't be afraid to give a subscribe, to like the video, to ring the bell, leave a comment, let me know what you think. And if you have any ideas for the next build, what I should do to build next, whether it's video game inspired or book inspired, please do send me a message. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.